Just imagine earning £9 million and spending it all. This is what happened to a garbage collector in England named Michael Carroll. He won the lottery and spent all the money. So today he's wishing he still had his old job at the junkyard. Probably you also know other stories very similar to people like Michael. And before we criticize these people, we should reflect on our own behavior and see there's a little bit of Michael in each one of us. I like to call this analogy the Four Horsemen of Poverty. There are 4 elements that make us act in a financially unintelligent way. What are they? The first one is the psychology of consumption. Number 2 is our cultural and biological evolution. The third one is our family's influence. The fourth factor is our habits. In our financial enrichment course, Truly Wealthy, we will explore in detail how to change our mindset and protect ourselves from these 4 horsemen of poverty. I promise we're gonna make an introductory video here, quick one. When we speak about the psychology of consumption, we always use the BBC documentary called The Century of the Self. This documentary tells the story of Edward Bernays and the family of the famous Sigmund Freud, who understood very well the importance of many symbols in our lives. Edward Bernays was Freud's nephew, and we can say that he is responsible for women being smokers today. And why is that? Because at the beginning of the last century, it was a very strong taboo for women to smoke. And then George Hill, the president of the American Tobacco Corporation, showed up and told Bernays, who was a consultant at the time, something such as, "Look, I am losing half of my market because of this taboo of women not smoking. What can you do about it?" And then Bernays went deep into the research of the psychological behavior to understand all these symbols that make us act in irrational ways. And for this, he used a lot of theories proposed by his uncle Sigmund Freud. And then he discovered there was a connection between the cigarette and phallic symbols, symbols of power. From there, he decided that if he could connect the idea of smoking cigarettes with defying male power, he could make women smoke. But how would he be able to manipulate the masses in such a way? Well, he knew that every year in New York there was an Easter parade that got a lot of attention. So Bernays agreed with high society debutantes that they would hire cigarettes inside their dresses, and when he did the sign, they would light these cigarettes and start smoking. At the time, he had also some connections with some photographers and some journalists, and then he said, "Hey, you, stay in that corner, and when I signal you, you're going to see something quite interesting to photograph." So these photographers joined the women debutantes, and they took photographs that were printed in the covers of all the American newspapers and even some international ones with a rather symbolic headline saying, "Women light the torches of freedom." So these became connected with a symbol that was loved by the whole of society, the Statue of Liberty. And this spawned a public debate. In this debate, women who agreed that women, they should have more power, they should have more independence, these are the women who began to smoke. This is an extremely irrational attitude, because what has one thing to do with the other? However, this just goes to show how Bernays knew exactly how to play with people's desires and emotions. There are so many other interesting stories. There is, for example, this one of Betty Crocker, the company that manufactures, among so many different products, they had instant cake mixes. So Betty Crocker created this instant recipe in which you just add water, mix it up, put it in the oven, but nobody would buy it. So they went to Bernays and asked, well, why nobody buys our cake mix? And let's remember that this all happened during a much more sexist period. The mentality was very different. In this context, Bernays found out that women bought this ready-mix cake. The preparation was so quick and easy. They felt guilty. They felt lazy. It felt as though they weren't putting the effort to deliver something nice to their family. And then the businessman asked, well, what can we do to fight this psychological behavior, this barrier, and make women buy the product? So Bernays said it was quite simple. You just had to give instructions to break 2 eggs, and mix them into this instant prepared bundle, and here again you have another symbolic act. This egg breaking kind of makes the process a little bit more hummy, rescuing the magic, the alchemy of the kitchen, despite having very little relevance with the actual finished product, the taste of the final cake. It was a small detail that made women feel guilty. And once they made this change, the guilt went away and sales started to rise. Okay, but what does all of this have to do with our financial lives? All our buying behaviors have a strong symbolic burden in how we define our identity. So please write down this statement. It is very important. Buying decisions have a strong symbolic burden on our identity. Why do I use a particular perfume? Why do I drive a certain car? It all has to do with the psychology of consumption, which greatly influences our identity. This was the first horseman of poverty. We all have to tame the psychology of consumption in order to protect ourselves from the persuasion of marketing. To learn more about the psychology of consumption, you can visit arata.se/Four Horsemen. I'm going to repeat this link later at the end of this lesson. The second horseman of poverty is the genetic and cultural evolution related to our habit of consumption. This idea comes from Spencer Wells' Pandora's Seed, which is an anthropologist who studied how agriculture influenced so many different aspects and elements of society and our health. He goes on to say that problems like diabetes and even global climate change are all side effects in a certain way of agriculture. How does it apply to our consumption? Well, when we find something that we want, our instinct motivates us to consume it immediately. We all have a desire for immediate gratification. Because in the past, when we would find, a tree with fruits or an animal suitable for hunting, the ideal thing was to consume it immediately because there was no guarantee where the next treat would come from. So we're all influenced by the impulse of immediate consumption. In fact, if you take a look at our body right now, our body stores energy in the form of fat to survive longer. But today we don't need that anymore. We have refrigerators, we have supermarkets. So we no longer need this mechanism. Regardless of this fact, it is a mechanism that continues in our genes, in our body. Especially for people who overeat the wrong foods, it can cause a lot of problems, overweight, heart problems. So in a similar way, our natural instinct for immediate gratification is what makes us want to go on a shopping spree as soon as we get our salary, as soon as we get paid. So when we haven't tried to control our behavior and we are relying completely on our instincts, we can end up behaving a little bit like Michael Carroll, the Bean Man, and spend everything. And the third horseman of poverty is our family's influence. This is a little bit of a delicate point, so I ask your permission to comment generally on what happens to some people. Obviously not everybody, but mainly people who don't come from a family that was educated with a solid financial education. Here's an example. You're a child, occasionally your parents come back home a little bit grumpy, they're telling how terrible their day was, and then since you're young, you're exposed to all these negative stories giving us a message that the boss is a bad person, is a very mean person. Another example is when a family argues and eventually money becomes part of the argument, of the fight, and we create a bad association that links money to arguments. Another situation is when you hear in childhood, and so parents say that they would like to do something, but they don't have money. So money again appears as a symbol of limitation. Remember the importance of the symbols and the whole story of Freud? Well, here are just a few examples of the kinds of situations in which family environments can unconsciously generate negative emotions towards money. We don't want to love money and we don't want to hate money. Money is just a neutral tool. It is an object. It is up to us to know how to acquire and use it correctly without an unnecessary emotional burden. And finally, we have the fourth horseman of poverty appearing in the form of habits. There are some people watching this video right now living day to day, guided by habits of wealth. Other people follow day by day oriented by habits of poverty. How does a habit of poverty manifest itself? Well, there are several ways. I'll try to illustrate just a few of them so you can understand. For example, opportunity cost. There's an episode of The Simpsons and Homer is driving the car with his son Bart and they find a truck lying on the side of the road. This truck had sugar, was carrying sugar. So Homer gets very excited and starts jumping and he says, I'm gonna get rich. And he starts to fill his car with sugar and decides to turn into one of those door-to-door salesmen selling sugar. And then the wife, Marge, who's always the sensible woman in the story, says that she doesn't really like that plan and that even the colleagues of Homer's real job started to call asking why he didn't show up to work. So they're all worried that he won't go back to work, and then Homer's reply is always very cool, saying, don't worry, Marge, look, I've got $1. I found it on the ground when I was waiting at the bus stop. So Marge says that while Homer earned that $1, he missed out on earning $40 by not going to work. So in a very simple way, this little story illustrates the idea of opportunity cost. My question is, what are we doing today? Are we using our time, our resources, our focus of attention in the best possible way? Or are we letting go some better opportunities? For example, let's say you're going to buy a very fancy brand new car. You're going to pay $70,000 cash. Did you only spend $70,000 by buying that car? Or could you earn even more? Maybe you could use that money into a good investment, earning 0.5% per month over 10 years and ultimately have $127,000. See, this shows how there can be different perspectives to understand our choices. There is no right or wrong. Everything depends on our preferences, our priorities, and some choices, however, are aligned with habits of impoverishment. Others are guided by habits of enrichment. The main point here is that our behavior is guided by our habits, and we implement these habits in our day-to-day lives, and this will have a very strong impact in our financial future. I promised this would be a very quick presentation of the Truly Wealthy Financial Enrichment course, and indeed, actually there are 5 knights, horsemen of poverty. The 5th horseman is such a powerful one, we need to explain it in a separate video. It's fear, and if you found this video interesting, if you want to know more, you can visit arata.se/4horsemen, and then you can add your email and get more information. So I talk to you later.